Hello and welcome back to my channel and part 2 of my Claude Chabrol retrospective. And today we're talking about Les Bonnes Femmes, which does not mean what I thought it meant in French, a good woman. And I found this out to my cost when I called a French work colleague a bonne femme, and she soon put me right. It's become a kind of pejorative term. The English language translation of the title in some American markets is the good time girls, which gives you an idea of what it really means. We've sort of leapfrogged over Chabrol's third film, A Double Tour, which is well worth checking out. And we've come to this fourth film, which is often regarded as Chabrol's best film of this period. Chabrol himself thought it was his best film of this period. I still hold out for Les Cousins, but there we go. Now, why did many people think that this was one of his best films? Well, the reason is because I think actually this is a very formally radical film, perhaps the most formally radical film Chabrol ever made. On the surface, it's a simple story about four shop girls. They work in this kind of hardware store for this rather cantankerous and rather lecherous boss. And they've all got little problems in their life, and they go out together and they drink together and have fun together. And it's just about their lives, sort of lower middle class Paris. That makes it sound like a narrative film, but it's not really. In fact, you could almost say that this film is like a free-form documentary. And it's quite an unusual film in the world of the Nouvelle Vague, because it's a documentary about the lower classes. It's about the working class and the lower middle class. People forget that the Nouvelle Vague was a very middle-class movement, and that these directors, Truffaut, Godard, Chabrol, etc., were on the right bank. They leant more towards the right. You know, in a recent interview before he died, Michel Simon, wonderful critic who used to be the editor, long-term editor of Positif magazine, he died last week. And he often, reiterated the fact that they were not of the left. Cahiers was a right-leaning magazine, Positif was a left-leaning magazine. And the right-bank filmmakers of the Nouvelle Vague were very middle class. So that's why Les Bonnes Femmes stands out, because it's actually a film that's about the working classes. Right? It's about four shop girls, and most of the time it's devoted to working class leisure. What do they do in their evenings? They go to the pub, they get drunk, they go to parties, they go to music halls, they go to bands, and they go to dances. And that's what the whole film is made up of, really. It's a string of events and parties and nights out. So it's not really a narrative with interspersed set pieces. The set pieces are the film, and the narrative just supports them. And it gives the impression, when I'm watching it, I feel it's much more like sort of a British documentary, actually, something like Humphrey Jennings' Spare Time from 1938. I don't know if you've ever seen that, a beautiful half-hour documentary recording the leisure activities of working-class communities in England. It also reminds me of the free cinema, the late 1950s free cinema in Britain of Carol Rice and Lindsay Anderson. Films like Every Day Except Christmas, which Lindsay Anderson made, portraying the Covent Garden flower market. And that film has the same feel as Chabrol's film. And it's quite interesting, unusual to find this in French cinema. So for both Chabrol and for French cinema, this film is a step forward. It's also a portrait of the changing nature of male-female relationships and how men and women hook up. And it's not especially a very nice one. This is a world where all the men seem to be on attack mode. It's a very proto-feminist film in that sense. Every man seems to be either wanting to get them into bed, and sometimes through nefarious means getting them drunk or trapping them in a room, and the film finishes with a guy, who seems to be a decent man, luring a woman into the woods and strangling her. Every single male movement towards a woman is a threat. It's aggressive in this film. And again, there's another scene where they're sort of horseplaying in a swimming pool at night, the standout set-piece sequence of the film, and they keep pushing the girls underwater, and the camera goes underwater out of the noise into the silence of the water to impress upon how violent an action that is and how potentially dangerous it is. So it's a film that's looking at this new post-war world of more liberality, more sexual liberality, but presenting it in rather dark and threatening hues. It's a very cruel film. And watching it again this time round, I must admit, I didn't like it as much as I did when I was younger for two reasons. First of all, because in order for the women in the film to be caught in these situations by threatening men, they're made out to be ninnies. One minute they seem to be all-knowing, they like drinking, they like hanging out with the guys, and the next minute they seem to be stupid and easily gullible. It doesn't really work. I feel that you have to sort of, that it stretches your sense of disbelief. The second thing is that there's a sort of queasy aspect in this film of middle-class people, Claude Chabrol, the director, Paul Gagouf, again the scriptwriter, slightly sneering at the caustic, tacky, vulgar world of working-class entertainment, which I don't really care for. But the reason I did a video on this film is because it's such an important film in the development of Chabrol as a director and of a French film. Going back to what we were saying about how Chabrol was much more influenced, he felt, by Lubitsch than he was by Lang or Hitchcock. And you remember that fantastic party sequence in Les Cousins? Well, again, there's some extraordinary set-piece sequences in this film, the best of which is the incredible swimming pool sequence, which I was fascinated with when I first saw this film when I was in my 20s. Because what they do is they get a bit drunk, they go to a party, and then about 10 o'clock at night, they go to this swimming pool, and there's tons of people having a swim. And I was fascinated, but I'd never heard about this. Is this what people did? Did people go to swimming pool parties? I'd love to think that you could go midnight in London to a swimming pool and it's full of people having a great time. I've never seen it. But it's a brilliant piece of direction. The way that Chabrol and his cameramen capture this world is absolutely fantastic. And the other great set-piece sequence is right at the end, where Chabrol brilliantly and very bravely cuts us off from all the characters we've so far known in the film, cuts to a dance hall, which we've never been to before, a young woman we've never seen before. She's picked up by a guy, she starts dancing with him, and then powerfully she turns full face to the camera and looks at us, challenging us, but also suggesting in her eyes, which are happy eyes, that she's found the man for the evening. Yet all the relationships we've seen so far through the film have been tinged with danger and aggression and deceit. It's a very powerful and strange ending. The four actresses are worth talking about. Stéphane Audran, Mrs. Chabrol, is here. She's rather wonderful, and she gets a great scene where she does a music hall singing act, and she doesn't realise that her friends have come to that music hall to watch, so she's sort of outed in front of them. Bernadette Lafont, very sexy Bernadette Lafont, Bernadette Lafont's presence in this film kind of interests me because Bernadette Lafont is not typical of the French actresses who were fashionable with directors at the time. Usually svelte, slim, quite cold. And Bernadette Lafont is she's very robust and earthy and sexy and funny, with the figure to match, and she's a great presence in this film. The woman who gets killed is Clotilde Joannou, an actress I'm not very familiar with, but has an extraordinary silent presence and wonderful face in this film. And Rita is also played by Lucille Saint-Simon, who has a slightly lesser role in the film. Two final points I'd like to make about this film. First of all, it sees Chabrol use something for the first time, which will appear again in his work, for example in the film La Rupture, where what he does is he mixes up very sort of raw, almost kitchen sink realism, right, in his portrait of, the banlieue of Paris and working class entertainments, with really ripe caricatures. If you watch this film, all the men in this film are ludicrously over-the-top stereotypes, particularly, for example, the boss of the shop, who is this sort of proverbial dirty old man leering over his shop girls and then pontificating pompously about the laws they should follow. It's a very queasy, strange kind of tension that Chabrol builds up. I'm not sure it always entirely works, actually, but it's a fascinating strain that he brings more and more into his filmmaking. And the final thought I'd like to leave you with is this. We see this film as an old film. It was, 1960 film. So it's sort of behind glass, isn't it? It's far away. But imagine if it was made now. Imagine if an art house filmmaker with his fourth film, made a film, went out with his camera and watched young women, working class or lower middle class women, just having a good time in bars and parties. Think about that now. Would you go and watch that? Would you enjoy that? Would you find that vulgar, difficult to watch? It's not really art cinema, is it? Or is it? Think about Harmony Korine's film Spring Breakers, in which some college girls, 4 college girls, in various states of undress, go out on various benders, get drunk, get laid, and do awful things. Do you like that? In a way, in a sense, what Chabrol is doing is he's taking us into that world. We see it as something distant, 50, 60 years ago. But bring it up to the present, that's what he's doing. It's quite brave, it's quite bold. But there's another aspect to it, that there he is showing these young women enjoying themselves and sort of showing the dangers of it. There's something rather conservative about this film underneath, because he and Gagoof, and let's not forget that Gagoof was of the right, they're sort of troubled by what these young women are doing, slightly sneering of it, enjoying the licentiousness of it, but showing the dangers of it. What does Chabrol and Gagoof really think of this post-war liberality of the 60s? That's the final thought I'd like to leave you with.